Hi friends, thank you for tuning in to the Concussion Coach podcast. I'm Bethany Lewis, the Concussion Coach. I'm a neurological occupational therapist and certified life coach, and I specialize in guiding people through their concussion recovery journey. I am passionate about helping people understand their injury, speed up their recovery, and reclaim control over their life post-concussion. The purpose of this podcast is to help increase awareness of concussions and the impact they can have on a person's life, and to bring hope to people who have suffered a concussion and those who love them. I firmly believe that sharing stories and knowledge about concussions will bring important light and understanding to this misunderstood and often invisible injury. The information in this podcast is meant to bring that awareness and hope and is not meant as medical advice. The opinions shared are those of the interviewees and my own. If you are suffering with lingering concussion symptoms, I have created a concussion coaching program specifically for you. I will be your mentor to guide you through your recovery journey, offering help with understanding and managing your symptoms, setting achievable goals, and learning how to manage your own thoughts and nervous system in order to get control over your life again. If this program sounds like something that would help you or someone you love, sign up for a free consultation. In the consultation, you'll get valuable information and resources and gain hope for your future. Sign up for your free consultation at the link in the show notes or at my website, www.theconcussioncoach.com. Hi friends, you are in for a treat today. I'm so excited to introduce you to Leah Davidson. She is a speech-language pathologist and life coach who has also worked closely with people with traumatic brain injuries and concussions. I heard about her when Jody Moore mentioned her on her podcast and talked about the work that Leah does around nervous system resilience, and I was intrigued. I looked her up right then and there, and when I learned more about her, I thought, I need to connect with this girl. I messaged her, and she was kind enough to jump on a call with me, and we had a great conversation about speech and occupational therapies and life coaching and working with people who have brain injuries and all the things. Leah is awesome and has a wealth of information and knowledge that is fascinating to me and perfectly applicable to my audience and clientele. She teaches a nervous system resilience training course in which I am currently enrolled, and I am loving the information that I'm learning and I'm applying to my coaching. So be excited for this conversation, people. You're going to walk away with a ton of valuable information and ideas for being more aware of and taking better care of your nervous system. So Leah, thank you so much for being willing to come today and share your knowledge and experience with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yay, thanks, me too. So let's start with a little more background on you. Tell us where you're from and what got you into speech language pathology and working with people with traumatic brain injuries.
Well, I am actually located in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. So I have been a speech pathologist for coming up on 25 years, which is kind of scary to me because it kind of feels like yesterday that I just graduated from school. I actually initially got into it. I have, from a very young age, I was exposed to the rehab world because I actually have a sister who has cerebral palsy and had all sorts of cognitive challenges. So my younger years were spent in waiting rooms while she was getting OT, PT, and SLP. And I remember in grade 4, the teacher asking us, what do you want to be? And I wanted to be an OT. And especially at the time, I think the teacher was, a what? Which even as you know now, people are like, what, OT?
What is that? Yeah.
What is that? And here I was, writing, when I grow up, I want to be an OT. And I wanted to do that pretty much until I hit my college years. And I just decided, nah, I'm tired of all the health stuff. And I went into business. And I finished school. I actually went into banking. I worked for a bank for 5 years until I realized I really don't care what people do with their money at all. When I spoke with people, I just wanted, how are your kids? What's going on? So I knew I wanted that personal touch. So I went back to school to be a speech pathologist, and then the rest is history from that perspective. I started working almost immediately. My final internship, I was in a setting where I was exposed to traumatic brain injury. It was not an area that I did my schooling in Quebec, which is in Montreal, Canada. And at that time, they did not have courses about cognitive communication. And so when I went to my placement, which I did in the US, my supervisor was sort of shocked. Like, what do you mean you don't have any information about cognitive communication? I actually didn't have any information about swallowing either, because in Quebec, it's OTs that do the swallowing.
Oh,
And
interesting.
yeah. So, and here I was in this placement in Boston doing swallowing and cognitive communication. So she literally handed me textbooks and all her notes from her schooling and said, your work's cut out for you. And so I spent that entire internship like day and night trying to learn. But it ended up being amazing because then I took a job in a rehab center. I worked there for 5 years. And then after I had one of my kids, I went into private practice with a local practice that specialized completely in traumatic brain injury. And I've been with her for 20 years.
Oh, wow.
Um, so lots of experience with that population. Love that population. Bridging it to traumatic brain injury into life coaching is kind of a funny story too. I Probably 10 years ago, I had a client who really wanted to be a life coach. And as you know, part of what we do is we help people get back into their lives. She really wanted to be a life coach. She had signed up for a certification program. We had a rehab support worker. I'm not sure what you guys call them in the US, but it's basically a support worker who would attend the class with her and take notes and help make sure she was pacing herself appropriately. And they backed out. And she was devastated because she really wanted to go to this course. And I just said, I'll go. I'll go with you. I think that's kind of cool. So I went and I got certified as a life coach, and it was fun. I started tinkering with different techniques and tools, and I started to see, I was like, some of these tools are really, really helpful for these clients. So I started diving a little bit deeper into life coaching and eventually came across Jody Moore, only because I was having mom issues, quote unquote. I'll put that. Now I know it was dysregulation of my nervous system issues, having all these kids. And then I eventually found the life coach school, got certified through there, and really started integrating a lot of the tools that I was teaching with my clients and seeing how they married so beautifully. And then as time progressed, I just started realizing, okay, even the tools that I have are not enough. And I really wanted to marry everything that I had been doing the past, 20 years or so with what I was learning. Came across more information about the nervous system. And as I came across information about the nervous system, I realized, oh my gosh, so much of this I've been doing all along. I just didn't realize that's what it was called.
Yeah.
And just did a much deeper dive in everything related to nervous system. So I would have not just my experience, but have sort of the education that supported it. And it brings me to where I am now, where I'm passionate about the nervous system. It's my favorite thing to talk about, as you know. And I just love how it goes hand in hand with mindset work and hand in hand with really the work that you and I both do in cognitive work, cognitive communication, even physical. The nervous system is the foundation for everything that we do.
Yes, it ties into all of it. That's awesome. I love your story. I love how it all has come together and where you're at now. It's so exciting.
Yeah.
And so what other trainings or certifications have you ended up pursuing?
So I also am a professional resilience coach and consultant, and essentially along my journey, coming across things like burnout and compassion fatigue, because as you know, working with in any helping profession, it's kind of impossible that you don't burn out. It's kind of an occupational hazard. So I came across a program and spent a year training in that program to help other healthcare professionals deal with their compassion fatigue and burnout, which is part of my training and nervous system resilience that you're taking that we'll get to. We're getting to that part eventually. I have done a lot of work in the area of trauma. So I've done some certificates for, trauma-informed health and wellness, trauma specialist. I have done certificates in breath work and EFT, emotional freedom technique, tapping, because again, those things are great for nervous system regulation. And then I've also done a few courses on chronic pain and chronic illness, including being certified in pain reprocessing therapy, which that is very relevant, as you know, for our population with brain injury.
Yeah.
So I'm always trying to add to, a lot of the clients, they have PTSD. So I want to dive more into trauma, and they have challenges with the nervous system. So all those things, pain, chronic pain and illness is anxiety, depression. These are all things. So I'm always trying to up level my education around all those things. I love to learn. It's like
Um,
my favorite thing to do.
I'm so with you. Yes, this is why you're like one of my favorite people, because it's like you are learning and loving all of the things that I'm super interested in as well. And so I love that you're just this wealth of knowledge to
Yeah,
tap
yeah.
into. So thank you for all
Love it.
you've learned and the suggestions that you'll have. I'm definitely super interested in pursuing a lot of those things that you mentioned as well.
Yeah,
So excited
yeah.
about it. So, and the class that you're teaching, which I absolutely love and would recommend to everybody, but there are so many topics that you've covered that I would just love to dive into more with you. But since we're limited on time today, I will try really hard to narrow it down, and I've decided to just focus on the nervous system. We need the
Mhm.
foundation here. So can you give us a broad overview of the nervous system, what it is, and why should people care to know about it?
For sure. So the nervous system is essentially, it's your brain, your spinal cord, and all the nerve connections. It is how your mind and your body communicate with each other. So that's why it's so important, because the mind and body are not separate. They are connected. And without making it really too complicated, sometimes it can seem overwhelming, but it comes down to just fundamental basics. Your brain is constantly on the lookout for safety or danger. It's scanning all the time. It's looking for cues of safety and danger, and it is picking up on the cues around you. So, what's going on in your environment? It's picking up on what's happening inside your body, and it's picking up on what's happening relationally. So, in between all the people. And what it does then is it picks up on these cues and it takes in everything. And based on what it perceives, and that's interesting because it's not what's actually happening, it's what it perceives. It actually assigns a state of connection or protection.
Hmm.
So it's scanning, it's like danger, safety, danger, safety. If it comes across safety, then it sends you into one state, which we can talk about in a second. If it finds danger, it wants to protect you. So then all of a sudden it's going to kick its protection gear and keep going through that. Now, what's really important about understanding about the nervous system, and I find it so freeing to know, it is not a choice. It's not a cognitive process. It's not like an option. Press 1 if you want to go here, press 2 if you want to go here. It is biology. Your biology is responding. You're not thinking, you're not choosing. It's not under our conscious control. This is sort of the behind the scenes in what is happening. So it's picking up on all these cues, which is something called neuroception, which we've talked about in the course. And that's essentially, it's a term that's coined by Stephen Porges. He is the creator of a very popular neuroscience theory called polyvagal theory. And neuroception, neuro means brain, ception, like perception, just says it's what's happening under conscious control. You can almost think of it as like your spidey senses. Like sometimes you just, you pick up on cues like, is this safe for me? Is this dangerous for me? So if we hit safety, the safe state, what happens is I call it the state of resilience. Basically, where you just feel like you're at home. It's a place of connection. It is a place where you sort of just feel comfortable. You are able to connect with others. You're creative, you're confident, you're calm. And this is where we make things happen. We can process our emotions in a really healthy way here. We are open to guidance. We're open to inspiration. We're resilient to our challenges. Now, we have our ups and downs, but we are safe. And in the autonomic nervous system, we call this the parasympathetic nervous system. And then in that polyvagal theory that I mentioned earlier, it is called safe and social zone. So this is where we go when we feel that we are safe.
That's also where we like have access to our higher thinking brain as well, right? Like we can
Yes.
think
Yeah.
and
And
reason.
that is crucial to understand, to access to our higher thinking there. The safe and social zone is sometimes also called the ventral vagal state. And they call it the ventral vagal state because of the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is basically a collection of nerve fibers that go from your brainstem all the way, sort of wanders through. That's why it's called vagus, wanders through your body. It has branches off to the face, branches off to the heart, ends up in your pelvic region. And that is the main feedback loop between the brain and the body, how it communicates. So if your brain and your nervous system picks up that everything's safe. It's like, great, we're staying in this safe and social, we're going to connect. Now, if it senses threat, it's going to do something, because the main goal of your nervous system is really like, it's about survival. So it will start to mobilize you and puts you into something that's called the sympathetic state. You probably have heard of it: fight, flight, and freeze.
Mhm.
I call it working with team hyper, because you are hyper aroused. And it's an amazing state. We want this state because when we are in actual danger, we need to react quickly without thinking. So we will first try to mobilize and protect ourselves by going in this state. And all sorts of things happen in this state where our heartbeat, we are able to move more quickly. But there's also a whole change of physiology, which we'll talk about in a bit, that cascades down to what our thoughts are and what our feelings are and so forth. So we get signs of danger. We're bumped up into this activated state. We try our best to fight or flee from it. We try our best to do something. If that doesn't work, our nervous system, it's like it has a conversation. It's like, this is not working out and we're getting really exhausted here. We're going to have to shut down and conserve energy.
Mm-hmm.
And so we drop down into a lower state, a shutdown state, so we can conserve this energy. And this is I call it team hypo. And it's basically where we are hypo aroused. We are conserving energy there. It is a protection. A shutdown is an immobilized state. This is actually another branch of our parasympathetic system, and it's called the dorsal vagal state with that polyvagal theory, and I refer to it for simplicity. I do the team hypo. Now, what is so important about both team hyper and team hypo, those are your choices when danger, is we will be able to go there and be there, but we will not have access to our thinking skills when we are in those states. And that's when the problem happens, essentially, right? And think about it logically. Like, think when you are feeling stressed out and you are feeling maybe very threatened, and you start to have the symptoms. When I ask people, like, what happens to you? A lot of people say, my heart, my breathing changes, my hands are sweating. And then they usually say things like, I just can't think straight. And I try to say something and either the words don't come out or the words are all jumbled, and I get all flustered, and then I'm just like, okay, forget it. So they're just describing, yeah, exactly, because you don't have access to your thinking skills when you are in those two different states. But it's not a choice. And that's what you want to keep reminding yourself. This is just physiology. This is like your nervous system is trying to protect you. And when you're in danger, it is going to try to protect you by getting away from danger, or by almost like shutting down, playing dead from the danger. And it's meant to work that way. You're just not meant to stay in those states. And as we've seen, problems happen when we do end up staying in those states.
Yeah, I love the point about how it's physiology and not a conscious choice. It doesn't mean that you're crazy or lazy or whatever. There's no judgment or morality tied to it. It's just, you're a human having human experiences. This is how your body's responding.
And a lot of people will say, like, well, I just feel so, and they'll even say, like, I just feel so stupid. Like, I didn't know, why didn't I say that? Or, they said that to me and then I walked off later on and I thought, oh, I should have responded this. Just physiology. Your nervous system kicked in and you lost access to, I call her your CEO, which is your thinking skills. You lost access to your CEO because she's not around when you're in those states. It's not like you lack intelligence. It's not a moral thing. It's not anything to be ashamed of. That's just the way your physiology responds. And it's supposed to respond that way.
Yes. And I think too, it's knowing that can allow you to have so much grace for yourself, and then having that love and acceptance for yourself allows you to move past it, right? Like, exactly. Then you can learn what to do if you don't want to stay in those states, which
right. Yeah. So, and you can have compassion for others. So when you see other people are maybe overreacting, and in each state, like I mentioned earlier, when you're in team hyper or team hypo, in each state, there is sort of I call it a landscape of what things look like. So there are certain emotions There are certain actions, there's certain postures, there's certain ways that you breathe when you are in that state. When you're in a hyper aroused state, if you are more in the fight area, you're probably going to have more anger and frustration and irritability. If you are in more of the flight, you may see more anxiety, more chronic busyness, more worry, more hypervigilance. So, and then if you come down to team hypo, you're going to see flavors of like hopelessness and helplessness and feeling like a victim and feeling overwhelmed, and then frankly just burnt out. That's where burnout lives when you're in that team hypo. So each state brings along with it a certain like tint that everything is going to be painted that color when you are living in that state.
Yes. Yes. Can you share? I love your analogy of, or the example of how that lens changes how you see everything and how you respond to things. Like you'll be more defensive in one, or like,
That's right.
Can you share that example?
So I have a couple of stories just because so many times in your life you realize, oh, that's just my lens. But the simple basic one I always talk about is if somebody is asking me where I get my hair done. And if I am on team hyper, which means that I'm going to be more activated, probably more defensive, maybe a bit more edgy. So if they say, Leah, where'd you get your hair done? I might respond with something like, why? Why do you want to know where I get my hair done? What, you don't like it? Like there's nothing wrong with my hair. So judgmental, because that's the flavor that I'm seeing everything. That's the tint. That's the lens that I'm wearing. Now, if I'm in team hypo, I may say something like, oh my gosh, I know it's terrible, isn't it? Like I am so embarrassed by it. I don't want to tell you where I got my hair done. And then if I am in that team resilient, I'd be like, sure, I get it done at this location with this person. I've been going there for 20 years and there'd be no meaning to it. And we always have 3 different ways that we can tell a story. And often when I have clients come in, just by the flavor of their story, I can tell what state they're in. And same thing with my kids. Like when my kids call me up, we have a blended family of 5 kids, and we're just about to be empty nesters. So they're all out. So sometimes they'll call. And within a few seconds, I can tell based on, like, oh, I'm having a really bad day today. I didn't do well on my test. And then this happened, and I'm just like, they're on team hypo. Or, I'll say something like, I haven't heard from you in a while, which is a common thing to say. And if one of my kids breaks out with the like, well, I know I've been busy, like, I can sense, whoa, whoa, whoa. And I don't have to be offended by it. He's not being mean to mom, his nervous system. Okay, but what's going on? Sounds like maybe you're having a rough time. I don't have to make it about me. I understand that it's his nervous system that is creating that activity. So it's really helpful when you realize that there's different lenses, because that means you have different stories that you can pick up on.
Yes. And I love that it allows you access to compassion for other people when you see that. And I think it probably helps to have that compassion when you are in your zone of resilience yourself.
Yes.
So how can we grow that zone of resilience? How do we get there?
Well, and that's the thing, resilience, it can be grown. It's not a make it or break it. However, that being said, that middle zone of resilience, there are a lot of things that do function. We'll talk in a second about how to grow it, but I just want to mention that there are things that naturally shrink our zone. And I just want you to think of a general idea. Both you and I are moms. Think of when, and you are in the crux of having youngins, but when your kids are young and they're super demanding and you get no sleep, how much patience are you going to have the next day with them?
Very, very little patience.
Very, very little patience. Your window of tolerance, this zone of resilience, it is going to shrink when you don't have things that will support it. So when people are struggling with pain, with fatigue, with lots of challenges in life, their zone will shrink. We know, especially if people have had trauma in their life, and whether it be trauma from childhood, just everyday trauma, because we have all experienced trauma, because trauma is not the event, it's what happens to the person. Or maybe they have had an accident or an injury. When these things happen, our zone shrinks and it gets smaller and smaller, which means that it doesn't take much for us to get activated. And so somebody may say something to us, and when we are pain-free and we've had a lot of rest, we've just come back on vacation, we probably have a lot of room, that we have like a long thread that, we're quite patient and we can answer. But if we have pain, if we're exhausted, if maybe we've been experiencing, challenges, past traumas come up, we may have like almost no room at all. And so we will quickly leave that zone and we will be activated. So that zone can grow and it can shrink. We want it to grow because we want to spend as much time as possible in that zone. And so we want it to be as wide as possible when we are there. And that zone is a zone of safety. And so how do we grow it? Well, we need to train ourselves to feel more safe, which kind of sounds funny, but we need to find ways that we can invite safety into our life. And that will look very different for many people, but there are a couple fundamental things. I talk about 5 main pillars for your physical and your mental health. And this is, I know that you have a lot of clients who have concussions, and I talk about these with my clients as well. Because if you don't have the 5 main pillars that are supporting this safety zone, then when you come to me and as a speech pathologist and they're saying something like, I really have a hard time reading, or I'm having a hard time with memory, I have a hard time with word finding, give me a strategy. I'm like, I can't give you a strategy before we look at the foundational things to make sure that you're growing your zone. So the foundational things are sleep. That is, and of course, that's a huge challenge for a lot of people after they've had a concussion, is their sleep gets out of whack. Okay, well, we need to start working on how can we get more consistent, more regular sleep, whether that be that they have to do something, if there's medical management, that you've seen a doctor, you've done a sleep study, or it's just about sleep hygiene, it's just about routine, or it's about mindset and nervous system regulation work. So it's all these things we want to explore. We want to talk about movement, and movement is crucial for everybody. These 5 pillars are crucial for everybody, not just people who have had injuries. So movement, getting the appropriate sunlight and daylight, which again can be hard for people after concussions because they have a lot of those visual challenges where they don't, lights bother them. Sunlight is still important to get. Nutrition, making sure that you're getting that proper nutrition, and then connection, which is just having those support people around you, whether that be your family, friends, or maybe it's a rehab team that you have. So you have to have those 5 pillars. That's where we start to grow our zone. When we are working, you don't have to have them perfectly, but when you're working on those 5 pillars, that's going to start growing your zone. And then you're going to kick it up a notch and say, okay, what else can I do? And that's where I like to introduce with my clients different breathing exercises to help with relaxation, because we know a lot of people, when they're dysregulated, they first go up to that team hyper. Team hyper means you're going to be very, very tense and very stressed and very tight. And you need to learn how to down regulate yourself. And we do that by focusing on the exhalation. So I teach some techniques about that. Part of building a bigger zone is trying to help reset your stress cycle, is what we call it, on a daily basis. Every day, sort of your stress levels are going up and up just by nature of the ups and downs of life. Well, at the end of every day, it's like you have to refill your pitcher. You have to make sure that you have enough water. And we do that through exercise and creative expression and meditation. These are all things that you can do that are basically refueling you. Anything that refuels you is going to grow that zone. And then after, there's things that help you feel safer. So connecting with people, affection, laughter, that social piece. And then we also can actually push the limits and really try to grow by challenging ourselves. And so when we're in that zone of safety, we can sometimes do things like set a hard goal and push ourselves to do things. And then there's actual things that we can do to push our nervous system: high intensity training, cold water exposure, and then something called the non-sleep deep rest, which Andrew Huberman talks about on his podcast, which is basically a way of resting your body throughout the day. All those things will help grow that zone of safety.
Awesome. Oh, there's so many good things, like I said, that we could just dive into so many. But one of the things that came up in my mind as you're talking was with that, the connection piece, which I think is one of those 5 pillars, but it's also one of the things that can grow the
Yeah,
zone of resilience. There is
it's both. Yeah.
connection with yourself and with other people and with a higher power. And I think with, with animals as well, like people
Yeah,
can get a lot of peace from and help
absolutely.
calm their system, like,
Yeah.
yeah, snuggling a dog or whatever.
Yeah. That's why they have so many support animals now. A lot of people having animals, there's no demands on you. So
Right.
a lot of people love to have animals, and it's calming to stroke them, to hug them. They're excited to see you. So connection with, yeah, for sure. Connection with nature as well is another big one that people can have. They've done so many studies of the benefits of nature and being in nature. And if you can combine things like, you know, going for a walk in nature, you're combining the movement with the social, with the nature, you're sort of stacking these things. And that's the best way to do that.
Yeah. And I love how all of these things, like there's so many things that everybody I think knows or has experienced, or like we hear from different sources, like this is something that you can do to help calm your system. This is something you can do. And I love that this just kind of ties it all together. It gives a framework for understanding
Yeah.
why all of these different things are so helpful, why having
Yeah.
a hobby and something that you love to do,
Yeah.
that, yeah, creative expression.
Exactly. Yeah. It all ties together. Yeah.
Yeah. So are there specific strategies? So you talked about breathing. There's a lot of good information about how to get from team hyper back to the zone of resilience. Are there specific things that you recommend for team hypo when you're feeling down and want to get back up?
Team hypo, when you are down there, there is that feeling of helplessness and hopelessness. And it is a place that a lot of people will describe as being lonely. And to be honest, it's hard to be down there. So if you are down there or you have a loved one who's down there, it is very slow moving. It does not help to be like, come on, get going, go outside and go for a run. Although, initially, I know with concussions at the beginning, they do want to put you on a protocol where you're doing exercise. But when somebody is really in that hypo zone, it is all about being gentle and kind and slow movement. Some people will really need what we call co-regulation, which is they need another person to be doing the things with them. So if you find you are in team hypo, it would be beneficial to find somebody who you find is compassionate and you can connect with, that you feel safe with, and doing things alongside them. That can help you. It's almost like somebody reaching down and giving you a hand, and not necessarily pulling you up and making you go walking, but reaching down and sometimes just giving you a hand and holding your hand through that period of time. Team hypo also, when you're ready, you may want to start introducing activated breathing where you're trying to get yourself going. It depends on how low you are in that team hypo, because if you're just really tired or exhausted and you're in that lower state, it may help where you start doing something that is more active and you get, like rubbing your arms and doing some activated breathing, focusing on the inhalation, because that will get you going. So it sort of depends on what state you're in. You do want to move from that state slower paced, because you are, I heard someone giving the analogy of a turtle who is like in the shell, when you want the turtle to poke his head out, you're not going to shake the turtle shell and say, come on, poke your head out. You're going to be very gentle. You're going to try to, coax and lure and be, soothing voice. And that's kind of how we want to treat ourselves and others when they're in team hypo, is we don't want to shake them like the turtle and say, what's wrong with you? Get out, snap out of it. You've got lots to look forward to. We don't want to be doing that, because that's really just going to cause people to retreat even more and just feel completely like unsupported, and nobody understands, pushes them further into reinforcing that hypo state.
That's a really good analogy. I like that. Yeah.
I can't remember who said it, but when I read it, I was like, oh, I get that. Like, I totally understand that.
Yeah, that is a good one. And I remember you talking too about, since movement seems so overwhelming and so hard, sometimes even just visualizing the movement.
Exactly. Yeah, just imagining it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That may be all the system can take initially. We're trying to do baby steps. And so sometimes it is just, okay, let's just imagine you doing that. And then we gradually move from there. And sometimes that's all a person can take, but that is still progress. We're still moving forward with that.
Yeah, I love that. That's a really good point. And are there any specific, I know we mentioned a whole bunch of things, but are there any specific strategies that you particularly love to share with people to help them when they are in team hyper and are like really activated and need to calm down?
Yeah. So I look at, when you're in team hyper, it's going to be one of two things. One is there's an excess of energy. So it could be, if you're feeling very, very anxious, you can actually feel it in your body, because that's the anxiety alarm lives in your body. You will want to get out and move. So going for a quick walk, doing activities, sports, things that will get that energy going, dancing around, jumping up and down, anything like that. That will help you get rid of the energy so you can down regulate. Sometimes though, it's not necessarily energy that you feel. It's almost like a stiffness, a tension that you feel. And in those situations, then what you'll want to do is you'll want to relax into it. I talk about something called the rag doll, where you just sort of, let yourself go, let it, I was going to say, let it hang, but essentially that's what it is. So you want to be asking yourself, do I have energy that I need to move? Or am I feeling like so tense that I need to just relax? And then I can do that. So those are kind of the two directions that you can go when you're on team hyper.
Yeah, I love the ragdoll is a helpful one, I think, for sure. It's like just letting your whole body kind of relax. The analogy of Toy Story, I love that.
Oh yeah, that was amazing. I had a client, when she was sharing that, she was teaching it to her kids. And because I go through a process where the ragdoll is a strategy that we use often. And as she was teaching it to her kids, it came up that, if you remember in the movie Toy Story, when all the toys are all playing around and then somebody yells, Andy's coming, and they all just completely like drop like little rag dolls. And that's essentially what we want to be doing. We want to be dropping. Like Andy needs to visit us a lot during every day, so that we can because when a body is relaxed, it can't house stress and anxiety and panic. So a relaxed body is what we want to go to when we are in that hyper aroused state, because it helps us just let it all go.
Yes. So it's so important to practice relaxing throughout the day, so that when you need to have, like when you're feeling that tension, your body knows what to do. Exactly. To access that relaxation.
Yeah, it's a familiar movement. That's that neuroplasticity, right? We have to be doing things over and over to build that pathway up. Sometimes people will say to me, well, I tried the breathing technique, or I tried the ragdoll, and it doesn't work. And I'm like, well, that's kind of like saying I went to the gym and I did 10 dumbbell presses and I look in the mirror and there's no change. Well, Yeah, of course not. You're not going to expect it. The change comes from the consistency of doing it over and over and over, where you're recreating, for your muscles, they're learning. But when we're doing something with our brain, it's the neuroplasticity. It's a new route that we're laying down. It's not just one time. It's going to be hundreds and thousands of time. And then after you do it, then it becomes almost automatic, where you just know that something will happen and you maybe will feel yourself get activated. And then just right away, you're like, okay, first thing I need to do, I just need to ragdoll. I need to take a breath. I need to do, whatever it is that will help me get more regulated. And you have to be practicing that.
Yes. Oh, so a couple thoughts on that. One, I think it's so interesting how our body can signal to our brain to let it know whether we need to be stressed or not. And that's really key. Like if we can have a relaxed body, then our brain can be like, oh, okay, we're good then.
Yeah. Well, and that's because as I mentioned earlier, there's that vagus nerve, which is primarily responsible for our parasympathetic system, which is that rest and digest, that state of safety, that we're meant to be in that state. That's sort of our home state. And that vagus nerve is a bidirectional nerve, meaning it runs both ways. It's going from the brainstem down to the body, but it's also coming from all the organs of the body back up to the brain. Now, what's fascinating about it is it's 20% is going from the brain to the body, and 80% goes from the body to the brain. So we can do things in both directions. That's why, your mindset and the power of your thoughts can definitely influence your nervous system and your body. But your body and your nervous system, actually, it has 80% of communication going back to the brain. So it's almost easier and more likely that it's going to have a better response when you start with the body. Now, the idea is you want both. You want to be sending the message. And I always say it's like sending that cognitive message. Hey, we're good up here. And then the body's like, yeah, but we're not good here. And then when the body's like, okay, fixed it. We're relaxed now. We're good. All right. Everybody's good. Roger that. Let's keep moving. We're all on the same page. We need to have that communication, and it's bi-directional. So we want to be doing as much as we can with our body, since 80% of that information is what's being communicated up.
Yes. Oh, so it's such good information. One of the things that my personal experience that I've had with this that I always love to share with my clients, and I don't know if they love to hear it because it's about birth, but I did hypnobirthing. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that or not.
Yeah.
But it's about, I always tell people it sounds really hippie and weird, but it's basically just self-hypnosis, like relaxation, breathing strategies to help allow your body to do what it's supposed to do when in labor. And with my first baby, I was like, I read the book and I listened to the little CD that had some scripts to listen to. I listened to that like once or twice and I was like, oh, good, I've got this. And then I went into labor and was like, oh, I don't have that. Yeah, give me the drugs. They did. It was great. But with my second one, I was like, okay, I really want to try this for real this time. And so I, like you were saying, I practiced. I did it for months ahead of time. At night, I would practice the breathing. I would try to relax. And I got to a point where even to this day, it's so helpful. Like I know that if I relax the muscles around my eyes, my jaw, my neck, my shoulders, then I'm like gone. Like it helps so much. And it was that practice, that regular practice, and practicing it through, I get really bad Charlie horses when I was pregnant. And my husband one time was like, you should practice your breathing through that. I was like, shut up and let me squeeze your hand. And I did practice it. And it was amazing. I could visualize like a zipper unzipping down my leg and breathing through it. And I could feel the muscles relaxing through my leg. And then sometimes it would zip right back up and I'd be screaming again, but it was so amazing. The power of that mind, body, that relaxation. It was so cool. And then, when I was in labor, as long as I was able to focus on that relaxation and breathing, I didn't have pain. I felt pressure, but not pain. It was amazing. So yeah, and so it was just a testament to me that the practice when you don't need it is really what makes it
Exactly. Yeah.
work.
Well, it's interesting. I have in one of our upcoming sessions, I use childbirth as the example. So I guess it's a typical thing that women, but, and that's, I can't remember the exact example, but that is the gist of it. Like you can't expect, like, they say, in my day, because I'm a little bit older than you, when we did the birthing classes, it was all about breathing. Well, you're not going to be able to access that breathing when you are in the middle of being in labor if you've never done it before. You do have to be practicing. The other analogy I give, which maybe is an easier one for people who who don't want to talk about birthing experiences, but it is being a pilot.
Mm.
And when they are in an emergency situation, you hope that your pilot's not like, oh, could you find me the emergency manual? And could you find what we're supposed to do? No, it needs to be automatic, which is why, from my understanding, they go through their checklists all the time. They're rehearsing the emergency. They know so that when there is an emergency, they've practiced it. It's automatic. They know what to do. They don't have to be looking things up on page 2, read out what it says. They don't have to do that. And your nervous system is like that. Like, you have to be reading the manual. You have to be practicing the technique so that when you are in a situation, and you will be in many, many, many situations where you're going to be activated thousands of times a day, you know what to do and you know how to respond. And when you respond, what that does is you calm yourself down, you get back into that zone, and then your CEO, she can step in, she can start taking over and start making decisions that are rational, logical, based on all the information, because she's not doing it from a dysregulated state. She's doing it from a safe and social and resilient home state.
Yes. Oh, so good. That practice so that it becomes automatic is really key. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has all been so good. How, and maybe, I mean, it applies to everybody, but in your experience, how has all of this information specifically been helpful with people who've had concussions or other types of brain injuries?
Well, I think the big thing is your system's been thrown off, and just understanding that. And we don't usually share that with our clients, which I find surprising. Like, you are launched into a state of dysregulation when you have sustained an injury. So you need to learn how to come back home, which is hard because everything is unfamiliar. And what I find with many of my clients is it's almost like panic sets in, because they're like, okay, this is not familiar. What's happening here? What if I don't get back? And they start stressing about the future. What if I'm never able to return this way and I have so much pain and I can't handle this? So they get really immersed and stuck in that team hyper. And then we know when you stay there too long, they can drop down into that team hypo. So I think that when they understand, okay, this is a nervous system reaction, in order for you to take advantage of all the strategies that all your therapists are trying to teach you, you want to start with learning how to be regulated. You want to start with trying to be in that home zone and not getting stressed out. And it's hard. For sure, because it's scary for a lot of people. Like, all of a sudden their world is turned upside down by, maybe it is something like an accident, but maybe it is something like they bumped their head on something, or it was just a fender bender or something. And when I say just, I'm talking about the incident. The implications and the functionality can be far reaching in people's lives, even with like a, sort of quote unquote, a mild incident. So you want to learn about your nervous system to get into that home state, so that when you see your OT, PT, SLP, and they're like, hey, try this strategy, that strategy usually requires your CEO to be in charge of it. And if you are in a dysregulated state, she's gone. She's not there. So you're trying to figure, that's why people get very overwhelmed. I don't understand. What do you want me to do? How to do this? It doesn't work. And part of it is because they're still dysregulated.
Yes. Amen to all of that. I love that you understand this, what people are dealing with, because it doesn't get talked about. And you're exactly right. The whole system has been thrown off, and people tend to spend a lot of time up in one of the other, and hyper usually, and often in hypo too. So, so when somebody has had a concussion and is in hyper, is it the breathing, those things that help to reestablish safety? That's the same
absolutely
strategies, right?
It's the same strategies all around. I know from myself, from speech pathology, I'm trying to teach people a lot of memory strategies and a lot of word finding strategies. My first thing is always, okay, stop whatever you're doing. Like, remind yourself you're totally safe, because that's a piece that your brain and your body need to understand. You're totally safe here. Even if you can't find the word, it's not the end of the world. Relax your body, take in a deep breath. Okay, now let's look at the strategies. That is the same thing in all therapies. In fact, and I think I shared this with the group, I was doing some physio not so long ago because I have some balance issues related to some vestibular. And she was trying to get me, the therapist was trying to get me to close my eyes. And I can't remember if it was balance on one foot or something. And I was a mess. Like, I just could not do it. And I kept on practicing and practicing. And as I was doing it, I realized, oh my gosh, I am just so tensed. And every time I kept falling over, I would like berate myself, like, what's wrong with you? I can't believe, like, you're not 90 years old. Like, you should be able to do this. And instead I was like, okay, I am going to, first of all, I'm going to stop. I'm going to breathe. I'm going to focus. And that's exactly what I did. And when I was calmer, it was amazing. The change that I was still having issues, but I was just like, all right, you're almost there. Okay, let's just do it. And I was kinder to myself and more compassionate. And when I was doing that, I realized, I was like, okay, I know that the regulation stuff works with speech pathology and all the cognitive communication, but it works with all the physio stuff too. From my perspective, it works. We function in general, in everything, in our relationships, in our physical, in our cognitive. When we are regulated, everything changes.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Amen. It was interesting. As you were saying that, I could even I could feel the tension when you were talking about it. And then I could feel relaxed as you were like, no, we're just going to breathe. We're going to be okay. Super, super interesting. And I think a strategy that is helpful for when people are in that state and trying to calm down in that moment is to bring it to the present. That's why the mindfulness practice, meditation can be so helpful. Like, okay, what can I see? What can I hear right now? If we bring it to the body, into what we're experiencing right now in this moment, then we can let go of all of the stress of the future being horrible and the past being the worst. It's like, okay,
our mind goes to the past and our mind goes to the future. Our body has to stay in the present. And so that's why if we get into our body, we have no choice but to stay in the present. And that's why there is such a push to focus on your body. And even mindfulness, it's interesting that we call it mindfulness, because it's really like bodyfulness.
You're right.
Really, we want to focus on the body. It's both. But I think we get tied into our thinking, and our thinking can just pull us past, future, present. Let's go back to the past again, back to the future again. Whereas our body's like, I'm here.
And here is usually safe, right? Like, all of the danger and fear is past and future. Usually right now we're good.
Right now, draw a circle around yourself and stand in it, and you are safe. That's where you need to be. This is the present moment.
Yeah, that's why it's so helpful to ask yourself, am I safe? And then recognize, okay, in my body, where are we? What is happening? And
in fact, you can't really be regulated. Like, I teach the 3 components of regulation. You can't really be regulated without asking yourself if you are safe, because your brain is not going to feel at ease if it senses that there's still danger, and your body won't either. So even if you convince yourself that you're safe, your body is just like, yeah, prove it. And the only way you can prove it is if you relax it, because then the body's like, okay, well, she's relaxing the body, then obviously she's not being chased by something that's going to kill her. And that's how they have that communication. So the 3 components are, am I safe? Which is that cognitive down. Am I safe? Yes. I look around me. Maybe I don't feel like I was safe, maybe 5 minutes ago, maybe, but in this moment, draw a circle around myself. I am safe. And then the next step is, do I feel safe? And usually the body's like, yeah, I don't feel safe. I have cramps, I have tension, my heart's beating, I'm sweating. All right. But we already know that empirically, logically, you are safe. And so now let's relax the body. And when we relax the body, it pulls it all together. And now we can be regulated. And now the CEO comes back in and she's like, okay, how can I help you? We go from there.
Let's move on now. Yeah.
Let's move on now. Yeah.
So good. So good. Thank you. So I think we kind of touched on this a little bit. You talked about co-regulation, but is there any other advice that you have for someone who's supporting someone or a loved one who's had a concussion or brain injury?
Yeah. So I think co-regulation is something you can offer to your loved one, that when you see they're dysregulated, you want to be the model of regulation for them. So if they're having, it's the same thing as parent-child, right? If your child is having a freak out, we don't want to match it with a freak out. We want to sort of bring everybody down. So that's definitely something, if your loved one has an injury, want to do that. But I do think that you need to make you a priority. If you are a caretaker or a loved one, you need to be taking care of yourself. You are giving a lot. And I know that a lot of caregivers, partners, parents, spouses really are making their life changes too when somebody else in their family or in their surrounding has a concussion or injury. And they don't usually get a ton of support. And hopefully that will change as we start to see what a big role it is in providing, as teams, more support to the caregivers. But they also need to make sure that they are getting their pitcher refilled, because they're constantly pouring and helping. So what can you do to take care of yourself? How can you nourish yourself? How can you make sure that you get that proper 5 things, that sleep, that movement? You need all those things too. And refill yourself at the end of every single day. You want to do that. And then thirdly, I'd say you want to just acknowledge and remind yourself that a lot of it is biology. Your loved one is not deliberately trying to be difficult. They're not deliberately trying to, forget things or not be able to do things. They're struggling with it too. And their nervous system piece is really just biology. And so I think that can help when okay, it's biology at work. And it's your biology at work too. When you're feeling at the end of your rope, that's your biology sending you a message. And that's how our body talks to us. Our body talks to us through the feelings, the sensations that we have. So pay attention, tune into them, that you might need more rest. You might need more downtime. You might need more support. So you want to make sure that you're getting that.
Oh, beautiful. And so much, as you were talking about all of that, I was like, this is exactly perfectly applicable to parenthood, I think.
Absolutely.
And a lot of times parents are the caregivers for people who've had
Absolutely.
a concussion or brain injury, but even just in general, parents are, they have their caregiving for somebody else who is needing a lot.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's the same thing as parenting. We can't expect our children to be regulated if we're not regulated, and we are modeling regulation for them. And to be good, quote unquote, parents, however you want to define it, you do need to be taking care of yourself. You do. Otherwise, you have nothing to offer. You're at the end of your rope. Your zone is so thin that everything and anything is just going to tip you into team hyperstate.
Yes. And I think, like you said, just the awareness that it's biology, that they're not trying to do this, that is really, really genuinely helpful. I just yesterday, and this is a parenting analogy, but I think it matches. I ended up needing to take 4 kids from 9 down to 2 years old to the UPS store with me, which going into it, I was like, this is not going to go well. I just knew it.
This is a recipe for disaster.
Yes. Sometimes we put ourselves in circumstances that require a lot of us, but I was like, okay, guys, anyway, we went into it, and they ended up, of course, the situation ended up being that the person's point of service place wasn't working. Their system wasn't reading my card, and the line was backing up, and the kids one child in particular was aggravating all the other ones and caused, I'm sure you can.
I know.
Even as I started the story, I'm sure you knew where it was going.
Yeah.
I remember in that moment, I was like, this is one of those situations. I can see but that awareness alone was so helpful for me. I was like, okay, I'm going to try to ragdoll a little bit. I'm going to calm my body down. And I was so proud of myself. Did not freak out and kill the whole town. It was amazing.
Yes.
but like trying to separate the children, going back and forth. Yeah, it was intense, but that awareness, and I must have had enough sleep or something. I think that I was set up in an okay space, but I don't know. I just feel like it is a testament to that zone of resilience, being aware of it, knowing how to handle things is really
Yeah.
key to being
Yeah.
able to.
And I love that you are proud of yourself, because I think that's a piece that we often skip over. Like, be proud of yourself for doing that. Give yourself that reward, that celebration, because that also reinforces with your brain, like, first of all, hey, you can do this. So then the next time this happens, you can draw from this experience. And it just reinforces that this works. And the brain wants to keep doing things that work. It's like, okay, this seems to do well. Let's keep reinforcing that. So don't skip over that step. I
Yeah.
think that that's the small celebrations you want to have.
Thank you. Yes, no, it was good. And I applied something else that I was taught again from you, which was the debriefing. And as we were walking out with the kids, I was like, all right, kids, what went well? And my girl was like, nothing. I was like, no, I did not murder you all. That
That's
went
right.
really well.
That went well.
I was like, that, and then like what didn't go so well, what can we do next time? Like, it was a helpful, yeah.
Yeah, that review is so important for it's so important for your CEO, because she's making mental note of what she can do next time. And it's also really important for your nervous system, because it's reinforcing, okay, that actually does work. When I do that breathing, when I ragdolled like that, even though the circumstance didn't change around me, but I was better able to respond. I was able to choose how I wanted to respond. I felt so much more comfortable in my body, and it just keeps reinforcing that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I will just say too, I have never really wanted to murder my children. So to be out there, I really do love them, like, a lot.
We all do. I think every single mother has said those words in just obviously we all love our kids, but they can drive us absolutely crazy. And I think they're actually meant to do that. They are our biggest teachers. So
Oh my gosh, amen. And actually, it's
yeah.
funny, when I talk to my clients, a lot of times we'll talk about the importance of multisensory activities and how helpful that is for the brain, like doing things that involve your eyes, your ears, and your body all at once. And I'm like, if you have kids, you're set. Like, they're going to provide you with all of those things.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Plenty of challenges.
Yeah.
So any final tips or tricks, hacks, if you will, to managing and regulating our nervous system that we haven't already covered that you'd like to mention?
Self-compassion. I think we sort of mentioned that. Make sure that you have lots of self-compassion for yourself. Whenever you are going through something, it's okay to stop and acknowledge that this is hard, and that you are doing the best that you can, and your best is good enough. Like, not to beat yourself up for that. The other thing I would really recommend, and I work a lot with this with my clients, is make sure that you are tracking the good. And we talk about it in the course about tracking, the sparks, the glimmers, the seeds of hope. But I find that when you are in that darker place, you have an injury, you're seeing professionals all the time, there's a tendency to track the pain, track the number of times you forgot something, track the number of times you weren't able to read, or, these are all the examples I hear. Well, I had to leave early from this, I wasn't able to pay attention for that. And I get why we're tracking those, because you feel like you want to report them to the professional so that the professional can say, oh, yes, okay, I see that, and maybe I can help you in those areas. But you're just reinforcing those patterns with your brain. You want to make sure at the very least you are tracking just as much good things. And I talk about that equal airtime. Give equal airtime to the good and the bad. And usually when I start off my sessions with my clients and I ask them how their week was, whatever they launch into, if they launch into the bad, then I usually say to them, okay, now tell me about the good. And sometimes they are like, I didn't murder my kids. That's okay. That's okay. But if they talk about the good, then I'll be like, all right, what was harder for you this week? We want to have that equal airtime. There's a really great book called The Gap and the Gain, and we've talked about it before, Benjamin Hardy and Dan Sullivan. And the gain is looking at how far you have come. What is the progress that you have made? And the gap is really looking at how far you still have to go. when you are focused on how far you still have to go, it can be really daunting and it can feel very, very grim and it can feel like a long ways off. When you focus on how far you've come and how far you've come since your injury, because sometimes people are like, well, if I focus on my past and I was like this before. No, we're talking about how far you come since the injury. You can start to see the hope, you can start to see the progress, and then that helps with momentum. It helps keep going, it helps you build your confidence, it helps build that hope. So I really encourage people to make sure you're tracking the good and not just the bad.
That is so powerful. And it that allows for that gratitude piece to come in that can make a huge difference in our
Exactly.
mindset and everything. That's beautiful. Thank you. And actually, I had two clients come into mind as you were saying both of those things. Like one I spoke with yesterday, and she was telling me about a day where she just really had a hard time, and I was like, okay, let's just remember you're a human. And this
Yeah.
it kind of taught her about some of these things, like, hey, this is physiology. It's okay, like that self-compassion, just love yourself, and it's okay to have human emotions and human experiences and be who you need to be in that moment.
In that moment.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think also recovery, specifically with this population that I'm familiar with, recovery may not look like you thought it would.
mm,
And I find that people are usually very desperate to get back to who they were pre-injury. And I think that's completely understandable. Like, for most people, everything changed within a split second and it's not fair. There's usually, often people aren't to blame. There's no rhyme or reason to it, but they're very desperate to get back to who they were. And that actually can be a roadblock. And I liken it to, I'm about to be an empty nester. So all my kids will be gone. And so I'm going to be a single mom again, a single woman again. I'm still married, but I'm not going to have any kids. Similar to how it was pre-kid, where I didn't have any kids. I can go out for dinner every single night if I want. I can sign up for whatever activity. I can do all those things. Is it the same thing though? Is it the same thing? It's not,
mm,
because I have had experiences of being a mother that has forever changed me. And I have always said, once I became a mother, I never looked at the time the same way again. Because when my kids were little, if it was like 10 o'clock, I'd be thinking, oh, they're having recess right now. Or if it's noon, or now that my kids are older and I have certain kids in different time zones, I'm constantly calculating. In fact, one of our kids for Christmas a couple of years ago, our kids were scattered over 3 time zones, and they bought us 3 clocks so we could put them up in our kitchen with all the different time zones. So I'm always looking up, what is this person doing? This person, this person. That is way different than what I ever did pre-kid. I may not have kids with me at home, but these experiences, I've become a different person. And I liken that once you've had an injury, you can't really go back to who you were before, because you have had such significant changes and challenges that have helped you grown, that have helped you change. There's, post-traumatic growth, which we won't even hit that right now, but there is post-traumatic growth where a lot of people do come out and they are able to have that possibility and certain areas of their life to be better. Now, some are different, some are better. A lot of people grieve, but you can have grief and hope at the same time. They can all coexist. So when people usually say to me, I just want to get back to who I was, I don't say up front to them, like, no, you don't. But along the way, we talk about coming to version 2.0 of yourself.
mm.
So there are things that will come with you. There are things you will likely grieve, but there are so many other things. You don't even realize the richness of your life, much like being a mother. I can't remove it out of me.
And
I
you would
don't
have
want to remove it out of
exactly. That
me.
is a beautiful analogy. I love that because it does, yeah, it changes you, and in some ways you may like, in some ways you may not, but there are going to be things that the depth of experience and your knowledge and your understanding of things is going to be so
Right.
much deeper. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's a great analogy. Thank you for sharing
Yeah.
that.
You're welcome.
The other client that I was thinking about when you were sharing your two like pieces of advice was
one that had gone on a boating trip recently, and she had really bad vestibular stuff going on when she first got on the boat, and then again when she first got off of the boat and onto land. And they were like, is this okay that we did this? And I was like, yes, this is a huge win. Like she had that issue, but then it went away and she was able to enjoy the rest of the boat ride. And then after she got onto the land, it was hard for a little bit, but then she was fine. Like those are wins. Like let's focus on the things that, the progress that we are making. It really does make a big difference.
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect. So one of the main reasons that I feel so passionately about doing this podcast is that I know that there's so many people out there who are suffering from post-concussion symptoms or other brain injuries who struggle to maintain hope. And I want to offer hope to those who are struggling through this and let them know that they're not alone. And you've seen lots of people going through similar things in your work over the years. And what have you seen and learned that could offer hope to these people and to those who love them?
I think really touching on that idea of post-traumatic growth, that I have seen so many people who have been able to create beautiful version 2.0s of themselves and been able to embrace some of the pain and the sorrow and the grief that they go through. I've seen people who have made choices in different directions that they never thought they would. I've had quite a few people say to me, like, I think I'm a better person. I think that I have learned so much more about myself, about being a parent, being a spouse. I've seen people who really do things in a different way. Sometimes there was a lot of fear in their life, and because they have overcome and they really stretched themselves by doing this rehab, that they aren't afraid of some of these tasks that maybe previously they never would have done. I've just seen such amazing examples of resilience. I mean, this is, as much as I do coaching, I still always kind of want to keep my hand in speech pathology, because I just find so many of my clients are so inspiring. And even when they're in that messy middle where they feel like it's just dark and is this ever going to get better? Is this going to go away? I get to have the perspective. I've been doing this for 25 years. So I can say, yes, it does get better and you will find yourself again. It will be different, like we talked about already. And it's such a privilege to work with people to see their growth. So really just hang in there. Like, it is dark in the middle, but there is light. And sometimes you need to be your own light. Sometimes you're in that dark tunnel going like, where is the end of the tunnel? You got to reach in your pocket and pull out your flashlight and just be the one walking through. And I've seen so many people do it. Surround yourself with people who believe in you. Surround yourself with people who are compassionate, but also surround yourself with people who are going to push you a little bit, because you also, there are things that you are capable of doing that sometimes fear steps in the way. And, fear of symptoms, fear of pain, that's a whole other thing that we can talk about. But live your life and have confidence that with these baby steps that you're taking, consistency, regulate your nervous system, that you will get there.
Yes. Amen. Amen to that. Thank you. That was beautifully said. Well, thank you again so much for being here. And I'm just so grateful and for all that you're doing and all that you've shared today. So if people want to hear more from you or work with you directly, how can they find you?
So I am on Instagram and Facebook at Leah Davidson Life Coaching. My website is leahdavidsonlifecoaching.com. And I have a podcast called Building Resilience. So that's where you'll probably hear the most from me. I love doing the podcast, and you'll probably find lots of little gems that could help you along your journey on there as well.
Yes, I would highly recommend everybody subscribe. Go listen. She's got good stuff to share. And Leah is Leah.
That's right. Yeah, Davidson. Yeah, with the D in the middle. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. This was so good. And I am really excited to get this out there and let people hear all this goodness. So
thank you so much for having me. And thank you for all the work that you are doing to spread word to everybody about that there's hope and there's different ways of doing things, because I think it's a message that many of our clients need to hear.
I'm so glad you listened in today. I hope you have gained some helpful insights and inspiration regarding dealing with and recovering from concussions. My goal is to create more awareness and education about concussions and the fact that there is so much that can be done to improve life after someone has had one. Help me spread the message by liking, commenting, rating, and subscribing to this podcast, and share it with others who would benefit from hearing it. There are more resources available on my website. And again, if you or someone you love would benefit from concussion coaching, sign up for a free consultation using the link in the show notes or at my website, www.theconcussioncoach.com. Thank you. See you next time, and take good care of that amazing brain of yours.